Don into the conversation. Hey, Don. Hey.
Hey, here I am.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Well, yeah. Congratulations. You've got a book going out in the middle of a pandemic. So how do you feel about that?
Congratulations or condolences? I'm not sure.
Actually, I think it's, there's a lot of people having to make decisions that are not normal now. So I think you could argue it's actually a great time for people to take this in. So that'd be my take.
Thanks. I will take that optimistic spin.
Yeah. Of course, we know how you feel about optimism, so we'll get to that one. Yeah. I think you signed off the I don't know if it was the intro or at the end, July of last year. Right? So how long have you had the book done? It's been a while, right?
Yeah, the timing of these things is pretty interesting. Yeah. We signed the contract in April or May of 2018. I committed myself to delivering the book within 18 months.
Yeah.
I beat that deadline by a little bit.
Yeah. That's impressive, really, when you think about it. And it's a lot to distill down to 200 pages, so.
The publisher first asked for a 12-month delivery window. And I said, I've heard of authors who have gone past deadline, and I wonder if I should plan on a little more time. So I delivered the book in October, November last year. And it's sort of been in process, back and forth with the editors. And then I get the page proofs, and then I get the galley proofs, and I do my best to provide speedy turnaround, and then it goes into process somewhere in the bowels of the publisher, and I don't hear anything for weeks or months.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
it's got to feel so good to be this close, though, right? If it goes out next week, so
yeah. So yes, but now the book moves into a new phase that I worry I'm not so good at. So I wrote this book because I care deeply about the message. I'm a scholar, and I have results to communicate and share with the world. So the writing was profoundly rewarding because of that.
Yeah.
Now comes the prostitution part, where I'm supposed to be tweeting and blogging and posting on social media and acting as my own marketing manager, and that stuff I'm not so good at.
Oh man, well, you're gonna get better.
Well, we'll see.
But I would have expected you to say, well, I've got a 38% chance I'd have it done in 12 months. And you didn't play that game with them? You didn't say that sort of thing?
I did indeed. Yeah, okay. I gave them a probability distribution. Thank you for noting the relevance of my message there. And they came back and said, okay, but we need to plan production schedules. So give us a date by which you're 90% sure it's going to be done.
You're talking, they're talking your language there then. 90%. Yeah, that's cool. No, I appreciate it. I feel, and I'll mention this during when we actually start the interview, I feel like I'm an optimist, whether it's by nature, nurture, or whatever. And by the end, I was kind of like, but then you picked me up in the last chapter too. So I felt like you did a good job of trying to just bring a sense of realism to all this, because I feel like it gets more surreal as I get older, with more polarization politically, you know what I mean? And more, people get more entrenched in positions. I don't know, maybe every generation's felt like that, but anyway, it just feels like, getting a pulse on what's real as opposed to what I want to be real is, I feel like, a big part of your call here, right? I mean, I think that's a big part.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And political polarization presents vexing challenges.
Mm-hmm.
It, as you imply, suggests that in a weird way, we're like living in separate informational worlds. There are smart, honest, well-intentioned Americans
Yeah.
who are paying attention to different news sources
Yeah.
and responding very differently to
Yeah.
information and current events than I am.
Yeah.
And trying to understand how that happens and what those people are paying attention to and what it means about how I should evaluate the vulnerabilities of my beliefs. Those are interesting challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I look forward to getting into the discussion. Just a quick background on the audience. It's called the People and Projects Podcast, but because the listeners lead people, lead projects. So they're not all project managers by title, but when you talk, for example, about not like 1 point estimating, but coming up with, they're used to things like optimistic, pessimistic, most likely divided by 6 or 4 times most likely, something like that. I mean, that idea of, although I would say they don't often use it, they're familiar with it conceptually, but we're constantly faced with situations of, well, you gave the example in the book, like Elon, I want the impossible by whenever, right? I want we're constantly faced with that sort of thing. So the cool thing about that is people are hungry for practical insights, and I would say evidence-based insights, which I feel like you're like all over that one. So a global audience, so they love to read, and so it'd be fun to sell some copies here too. So
that sounds great. A topic that I hope we'll get to in our conversation is goal setting, and in particular, stretch goals. The degree to which project managers or the people that they report to think that it's a good idea to be optimistic or ambitious in setting big, hairy, audacious goals.
There we go. Got it.
And the complex motivational traps that can get you in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love it. This is where everyone go, but man, I wish my boss would listen. So we'll make sure to get a point of that. I gotta check levels. Do you have like a favorite saying? I mean, you got so many good quotes. I found myself spending way too much time in my Evernote capturing your quotes from different people, but do you have a favorite saying, quote, verse, proverb, something I would check your level with you saying it? It's a very bizarre question.
If I were to pick one, I would probably pick Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know it by heart, but let me call it up. 1 second.
Yeah, there's no shortage of good Teddy ones. Is it the In the Arena one?
No. He it's when he said, "I'm just as little disposed to give way to undue pessimism as to undue and arrogant optimism. Both our virtues and our defects should be taken into account."
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, thank you for joining. I just want to say we don't have a fixed time frame, so elaborate as much or as little as you want. Okay.
Okay. And you will be editing me, so absolutely. If I stumble or screw up or want to redo an answer, we can go back.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great.
Yep. And the episode will be, when it goes live, I think it's on the calendar for 2 weeks from now, it will be audio only. But if we catch a 60 or 90-minute segment out of this, or second segment out of it, we might use it for social media. So
okay. I'm obviously not dressed up.
You're COVID casual, dude, so no worries.
Okay. I can go put on a better shirt.
No worries at all. Nope at all. I think it just adds to your credibility, and it makes you, dude, you're California, man. Like if you would come in a suit, I wouldn't have believed you.
Well, thank goodness I avoided stepping on that landmine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Let's start in. We're talking to Don today about his new book, Perfect. We're going to do a
easy for you to say.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking with Don today about his new book, Perfectly Confident. Don, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.
before we get into the book, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, because you talk a little bit about your family growing up in the book. So, how would you describe your family culture growing up when it comes to things like optimism, confidence, and decision making? And how did that inform how you think on those topics today?
Oh boy, my family dynamic was an interesting one that included contrasting perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
My father was the designated worrier whose um, uh, lack of confidence translated into downright paranoia in many circumstances, where the trunk of our car was so full of emergency response gear that we couldn't fit anything else into it. Whenever we wanted to go on a trip, my mom would unload his bags full of equipment and protective gear and flares and insulating blankets and food supplies and water bottles so that we could fit our suitcases in the trunk.
Yeah.
And my mom was the optimist who planned adventures for us to go on. And my dad was the paranoid who insisted that we always stay closest to the bathrooms and we not go too far off trail.
That's awesome.
So that tension played itself out in my family and in my thinking
Yeah.
about optimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, how could it not? Although, if there was ever a car I wanted to run into during the apocalypse, man, that would be your dad. Actually, you had a pretty, you had a couple of funny things in there. Very respectful, I thought, of your dad. But it was like an optimist is this, a pessimist is that. Do you remember that line?
I think of it often.
Yeah.
An optimist believes we live in the best of all possible worlds. The pessimist fears that this is the case.
Yeah, it's just one example of things that in the book just kind of make you think of, like, where are you? Because, all right, so I said this before we started recording, but I feel like anybody who knows me would say I'm an optimist. Yet after reading your book, I feel like there's a lot of things that are just within culture, within no shortage of books about optimism and confidence, that we might even say are common knowledge, or even we might even say they're common sense, right? That if you're more optimistic, you're going to fill in the blank, right? But after reading the book, it's just not supported by the research. Yeah. So we'll talk about what confidence is in just a little bit. But I want to hear Don Moore's, like, what are a couple of your favorite myths or at least unsupported assertions about these topics?
Yeah. I've been studying confidence for a long time. And when I give research presentations noting the limits of optimism and the dangers of overconfidence, I would routinely get pushback from folks in the audience saying, well, surely there are circumstances in which greater confidence does help performance. And my answer for a long time was, yeah, I'm sure there are, not in the circumstances I've studied, but probably others. And so I went in search of those others. So with a couple colleagues at UC Berkeley, Liz Tenney, who's now faculty at University of Utah, and Jen Log, who's now professor at Georgetown, we asked a bunch of people to tell us where they thought confidence was most likely to be helpful for performance. And then we took the domains that they told us about and tried to devise studies that would allow us to test that hypothesis. Yeah. One of the things that some people mentioned was tests, math tests, trivia tests. So we devised some experiments where we gave a whole bunch of people math and trivia tests, and we manipulated confidence. There's a lot of prior research that measures confidence and then notes its correlation with subsequent performance. And in general, there's a positive correlation pretty consistently across studies. But that result, those sorts of results don't answer the question, should you want to be more confident, all else equal? Should you make yourself more confident? Because there is, if you just observe a correlation, it could be that confidence is actually helpful, or it could be that underlying ability gives rise to both confidence and better performance.
Mm-hmm.
So what you need is what researchers would call an exogenous manipulation of confidence. That is, you tweak confidence independent of actual ability. Mm. So we devised an intervention where we led some of our participants to expect to perform well. We pumped up their confidence, and others were in the low confidence condition. Interestingly, we had a separate group of observers who we described the entire experimental setup to and invited them to bet on who was going to perform better. Those in the high confidence or low confidence condition. The observers were almost uniformly ready to bet. And this was with stakes, so there were monetary rewards for accuracy. They were ready to bet on those in the high confidence condition. They were going to do better. They believed in themselves. And we got that in their forecast for themselves. Those in the high confidence condition said, yeah, I'm going to do great at this. They didn't.
Right.
Not on the math test.
No discernible difference, right? I think is what the book said.
No statistically significant difference. Sometimes they did a little better, sometimes a little worse, but the difference was small, and it never attained statistical significance in any of our studies. So we tried the math test and the trivia test, and then thought, well, maybe that didn't really give them the best chance. What else did our participants say about how confidence might help? Well, athletic performance. Okay, so we devised some. We couldn't have, we didn't manipulate the confidence of an entire soccer team, but we devised some tests of physical endurance and athletic performance that we could have individuals perform on their own. We manipulated their confidence and then tried to observe its effect on performance. Again, the confident people were ready to bet on themselves. The observers were ready to bet on the confident people. Did we get a real difference in outcomes? No. So the title of the paper in which we published these results was Too Optimistic About Optimism. Can I say that confidence never helps? No, I think that there may be some circumstances in which having the courage to believe in yourself leads you to step up to competition and increases the chance that you have a shot, right? As Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the goals you don't attempt. So there may be some circumstances where confidence helps. We have had trouble documenting it in our research.
I just feel like do you remember when actually you referred to it in the book when The Secret was like a thing, and I just feel like, oh my, this is like such a bad idea. It's not even just bad, it's dangerous idea. I mean, it just seems like just sit back and that house will be yours, I think is the example you give. Or I think the idea of just, if you're confident, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're not confident, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I feel like there are those things that I think we take as just common knowledge that what you think becomes, and I mean, there's like an endless number of things here. And so part of the problem is maybe the word confidence. Like in the book, you bring out, there's three parts of confidence, right? So let's just see if I remember, right? So there is the estimation part, and that is, how good am I? How likely am I? Not necessarily likely, but when can I hit this date? Something like that. There is placement. How do I compare to others? And there is accuracy or precision. Yeah. Which is how accurate are my beliefs. So I got it?
Yeah. Okay. Right on.
All right. So the Heath brothers would be proud of you because you made it memorable there. So, all right, good. But why is the distinction that it's not just confidence, it's different aspect? Why is that distinction important?
There are a number of reasons why it's important. One is that it highlights the inaccuracy of our sort of naive everyday theories about confidence. It's easy to imagine that there's some people who are confident and some who aren't.
Right.
Or that confidence is like this general personality trait. The evidence doesn't support that. These different sorts of confidence, they move independently from one another. There are circumstances in which you can be sure of your conviction. My kid who says, no, I can't do that. There's no way I'll ever succeed. They are underestimating their future potential, but they are absolutely certain in that belief. They are over precise, but underestimating themselves. And there are a number of circumstances in which these different types of confidence move independently and respond to different situational pressures in different ways, putting a lie to the idea that there's some types of people who are just always confident about everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I loved how you broke it down about even like where the imposter syndrome fits into this, and how different aspects of this fit. And I mean, you're treating on biases. I mean, there's so many things that I loved about the book, Don. But for example, all right, so we are living in interesting times right now, right?
Indeed.
And so I feel like as a business owner, I've got a strong bias to say, or to look for data that says open the economy. Okay. Like my dad's in assisted living, my mom's in assisted living. I want them protected. I want those who, I mean, I even hate the term comorbidity. It sounds so cold, but protect the people who are most at risk, but doggone it, open the economy. So I'm masterful down at looking at the data that supports that and ignoring the rest, right? And then, but if I talk to an emergency room doctor, at least in New York City a couple of weeks ago, at least, maybe now still, they'd be like, Andy, you're an idiot, because they see a different perspective. So this idea of trying to be true to truth as I know it, which I think is part of what your thing is, we're so biased. So one of the things I love about the book is you're trying to help us get beyond our biases. And one of them is the idea of consider the opposite, right? Or test the alternative hypothesis or something like that. So how does that idea work? Like, how would you explain that? And how does it calibrate our confidence?
Thanks for the invitation to explore that idea. It is so profoundly important. Lots of psychologists have talked about the value of asking yourself why you might be wrong. This consider the opposite strategy is the most useful, general purpose, effective debiasing strategy that we have yet uncovered. And there are lots of manifestations of it. So one way to do it is in a team, as Daniel Kahneman talked about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He called it the pre-mortem, where before you undertake some action, like opening your restaurant to the masses, get together with your team and reflect specifically on the possibility that what you're about to do will turn out to be a catastrophe 5 months, 6 months, a year down the line. What are the most likely reasons that it will have gone horribly wrong? And is there anything we can do now to protect ourselves? Businesses thinking about making high stakes decisions about reopening now really ought to be grappling with these sorts of questions. Another way to implement that strategy is to seek out the views of those who disagree with us. Instead, it's easy to treat those who disagree with us as if they're somehow our enemies, or that we ought to prove them wrong or argue them out of their position, when instead their disagreement represents a valuable gift that we should appreciate. We should appreciate it by trying to understand it. What do they know that I don't? So if you're bound and determined to reopen not only your business, but the entire economy, what does that doctor from New York know that you don't? And if you captured the strongest pieces of evidence that they're paying attention to, if you captured the strongest argument that they can make, how does that suggest you ought to revise your opinion? Our enemies and our opponents offer us gifts that we ought to be able to capitalize on and enjoy. And one way to do that is by challenging them or ourselves by asking, want to bet? If there is some way in which we disagree with each other, what is the essence of that disagreement? And can we formulate a well-specified wager that we would want to take opposite sides of? In exploring that bet, you can figure out information that they have that you don't. They might figure out something that you know that they don't. In the end, my guess is your positions will come closer to one another.
Yeah.
But if there is still a nub of disagreement in there, then betting against the other person on what you truly believe is a positive expected value bet that you should be excited to take.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to think almost everyone listening to us would be like, yes, Don. Yes, Don. But I feel like you're in ground zero some way. I mean, the reputation of your town and school has always been like rebellious, look at the other way around. But think about controversial people that have wanted to speak there and they get shut down. Or you think about contrary opinions that want to be, and by the way, I'm not dissing your school. Peter Bergassian, we had him on the podcast earlier this year. I think he'd say, college campuses all around is kind of like an unintended effect that we have is like a lot of this stuff. So I trust me, I'm not trying to diss Berkeley on this one, but I feel like contrary opinions are getting taken down on YouTube right now. And I'm not arguing for them. I'm just arguing for, I think you're right that these alternative views that, man, they can be dangerous as well, but they can also nuance things. So I'm not expecting you to take any stance on a person or a view, but I think it is a challenge culturally these days to follow your advice, isn't it?
I agree completely. Yeah. And I regret the ways in which universities that should be promoting free speech, exploring alternative, controversial, unorthodox perspectives, have found themselves silencing speech that is somehow offensive to segments of the community. I think that if you try to explore particular cases and how I know UC Berkeley best, how the university has attempted to respond responsibly to controversial speakers, I think the university has had to tread a problematic line there, knowing the ways in which controversy can incite dangerous circumstances where the Antifa folks come out and start throwing bricks and lighting things on fire. The university security has had to think about how to responsibly manage hosting controversial speakers. But I share your unease with silencing controversial speech when it means we're denying those who have different views from us an opportunity to learn from each other.
So I just appreciate your perspective on that one. And it's one of those things where whenever I find myself complaining about culture, I always try to just bring it back to, we can't control that, right? But what I can control is what news do I listen to, or what people do I surround myself with. And I can think of somebody now that she might listen to the podcast, so I won't use her real name, but I'll say her name is Carol. Carol's one of those people that people kind of sometimes don't like to be around because she'll take either a contrarian opinion or she'll just say what needs to be said. And we prefer the pleasant lies over, what was that cartoon you talked about? There's the unpleasant truths or whatever, and the pleasant lies or whatever that is.
Comforting lies and inconvenient truths. Yeah.
I feel like she's an inconvenient truth person. But I've learned I need to be around Carol. I need to be around that sort of person. So I don't know if maybe that's a way to wrap that point up of like, we can't control that, but what we can control is how we consume and who we surround ourselves with. Is that a reasonable thought?
Yeah. And acknowledging the ego threat that comes from someone who disagrees with you, especially about values that you hold dear. Right. I will just acknowledge that it may be easier to handle that critic in a business meeting than at your dinner table. That the folks who you choose to invite to your house or to party with on the weekend might not necessarily be those who most stridently oppose your most sacred views. Right. But I will say that it is incumbent upon leaders to select advisors and colleagues who have the courage to disagree with them. Strong leaders pick competent people whose views do not perfectly align with their own. You want that controversy and diversity of opinion to help inform the best decisions.
I was really impressed of what you do as a business school and the hiring processes and things to actually enforce that. And we'll let people get the book to really get the details on that one. But I feel like in that regard, you really at the hospital really do try to practice what you're preaching here out of this,
We try.
I feel like a clear message out of the book is to put more like rigor into decision making using things like expected value, right? So something like expected value. So how would you explain that idea? And can you think of an example, a personal example, when you've personally used it recently?
Yeah, sure. I used it with my publisher when we were trying to anticipate when I would be done with my book draft. I used it in thinking about whether I should write a book at all. So thinking about uncertainties in the future. So I know some things about the opportunity cost of my time. And when I agree to take on some new time consuming project, well, there's some things that I could do with my time that are pretty safe. Like I could take on more executive education, and I know roughly what my hourly wage for that is. I could choose to write a book whose sales are highly uncertain. Before deciding to take on the project, I thought a lot about the distribution of what sales look like for books. And they are highly skewed. There are a lot of books that don't sell very much at all, and a few books that really sell well, bestsellers. What's the probability my book is going to be one of those bestsellers? It's not that great. But in thinking about the payoffs available to me as an author, I had to think about some of the things that a book could help me accomplish, independent of whether it sells millions of copies. That writing the book would force me to think through and sharpen the delivery of my message, a message that I've been honing for decades, studying the topic of confidence, and that a book would help solidify my reputation for this one domain. And that's what tipped the scales. Even though the expected value on sales, I think, is below my hourly wage for doing more teaching work, I think that the potential non-financial rewards of writing the book were likely enough that it tipped me toward doing it. A more simple example that I give in the book on using expected value had to do with thinking about attendance at my wedding. So there, obviously, how many people we could invite was limited by the capacity of the venue. And we didn't want to do this thing where we had a series of invitations and only extended to the second round those who the space made available by those. Yeah, exactly. We didn't want to have a B list. And so my wife and I went through, and for each person we wanted to invite, we estimated the probability that they were going to come. When that expected value got to the 125 that our venue could handle, we invited that many people. And I think it was 200 some odd people. They all got invitations. And the number who showed up was 126. So we found another chair, and it worked out.
I read that. I'm like, wow, that's like really cool. So, just I'll give a much more layman's term of it. I think of expected value through your book is like you say, what is the probability and what would be the upside? And you multiply that. And what's the probability and the downside? And you subtract that out. And what's the net? Right? So that's kind of the idea, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. The way I played in my class, when I'm going to introduce the topic of expected value, I pull out a $20 bill and a coin and say, one of you in this class is going to get to play a gamble where I flip the coin. If it comes up heads, I give you the $20. If it comes up tails, you get nothing.
That's big.
And I open the bidding and invite them to bid as much as they're willing to pay. The bidding very quickly goes to $10 and then stops. Why? Well, the expected value of that gamble is $10, a 50% shot at a $20 bill.
Yeah, you got to worry about the person that goes up to 18 or whatever.
It happens sometimes, and we make a lot of fun of that person.
But I wonder if you talk about the danger of conflating utility and probability, and your book example did some of that though, did it? Like you're looking at although it's maybe my misunderstanding of utility as well, but it's like, it's not just the raw dollars, it's other aspects. So is there any other part of expected value that's worth kind of keeping in mind as we try to, because I want people to get the book and to really act on that idea, because I think that idea is really powerful. I don't think we put enough rigor in that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about utility versus probability?
Yeah, it happens all the time that we mix up utility and probability, where we, for instance, are really scared by some outcome, the risk of terrorist attack, for instance. And because it would be so bad if a terrorist got a hold of a nuclear weapon and detonated it in an American city, we jack up the probability associated with that outcome. That's a mistake. So you, as a decision maker and policymaker, you want to get the best estimates of both disutility in this case and probability. What is the real probability of this risk? How likely is it that we're going to have a big earthquake over 7.0 on the Richter scale in the next 10 years in California? And what does that mean for how we should plan? Separate from calculating the probability is the utility. How bad would it be? And there's some decisions, some business decisions where because the utility is so enormous, it leads you to invest in small probability outcomes. And I talk about product innovations where the payoff is 100 to 1, but the probability of success is really low. The company should want to invest in those sorts of low probability, high risk outcomes. It has a highly positive expected value. If it's got, say, a 90% probability of failure, but pays off 100 to 1, take that risk every time.
Yeah, that is good.
There are a lot of companies that punish that sort of risk taking, because when it fails, as you knew it was going to fail with 90% probability, then that person, they can expect that their career will suffer. Companies that can sustain innovation, companies like 3M or Amazon, reward well-intentioned failure. If you take a smart risk with positive expected value, even though it's more likely to fail than succeed, you should reward people for taking those sorts of risks, even when they turn out badly.
All right. So I got to tell you, that was one of my favorite things from your section on clarity, because I think you kind of served it up as, some people are like, are you people oriented or are you results oriented? And you made a statement about, I think it's wrong to be results oriented. And I thought, man, the dude's talking heresy from that business school, but I want to tell you, it's something I hope to never forget, because would you mind? Because I think it's a kind of a continuation of where you're going with that one in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the danger of results orientation? And maybe there's something there about what you and I talked before we started about the goals. Maybe there's a tie there too.
Yes. So the risk in being results oriented is that you pay attention to outcomes that are influenced by luck and not the quality of the decisions that went into them. Every outcome is driven in part by luck. If you reward the fortunate and punish the unlucky, you'll be inserting this big random number generator into your promotion and your compensation schemes that undermine your employees' faith in your wisdom and their interest in making wise decisions. Instead, you want to reward good decisions with positive expected value, even if the person who makes the decision turns out unlucky and the decision doesn't wind up being a success. So I acknowledge the difficulty implementing this advice, because the outcomes are easy to see and quantify. The expected value of the decision made in the first place is harder to observe. So reflection on this challenge highlights the potential value in documenting the expected value of decisions at the time that you make them.
Right.
So you want to think hard about big decisions that the company makes, or products that it introduces, or big acquisitions. at the time, before you undertake that decision, think about the likely outcomes. How's it likely to play out? This could clearly be part of some sort of planning meeting where you go through a pre-mortem exercise. But documenting your expectations at that time, acknowledging the risks and the ways that it could turn out badly, is useful after the fact when you have the outcome and you want to reflect on whether there's anything to learn. Google has a post-mortem form that they make people fill out. Google is a company that has introduced many successful innovations and has a long string of duds in its history. There's all these products, Google Plus, its social network, Google Glass, the products that it tried introducing that it then
Google
had
Video.
to pull or abandon. Yeah, exactly. They Google Video, which they just had to scuttle quietly and then go acquire YouTube instead. After something has failed, they try to go back and do a post-mortem exercise. And doing that well is facilitated by having documentation that you can refer to that hasn't fallen victim to the hindsight bias. The hindsight bias leads all of us to think that the past was entirely predictable. We could have known that it was going to turn out this way, when in fact, forecasting is beset by uncertainty. And appreciating that uncertainty and how little you knew way back when is very useful. So go ahead.
Let me just say this. I mean, there's so many ideas I wrote down, but I think that idea might be one of my top 5 favorite things from the book of a lot of times we're not going to know until it turns out how did the decision turn out. But if we can go back to what we wrote down, and I think I do expected value in my brain, or I think I do. I think most people think we do the calculus, but we don't write it down. And so by not writing it down, we can't learn from it. We can't account for it, right?
Yeah. And if you're worried about your boss holding you accountable for your bad predictions, well, at least hold yourself accountable by keeping some sort of journal in which you write down what you think is going to happen. Bet with yourself on what you think the outcome of some decision or some expected value is going to be. And this could be anything from work goals. How soon do you think you're going to actually complete that software development project? To personal goals. How long do you think it's going to take to lose those 10 pounds? And then follow up with those well-intentioned plans and learn from them. You invited me to confront the topic of goal setting. And there's one where I think lots of people run afoul of the challenge that you described in letting utility and probability contaminate each other in this messy way where they've taken Jim Collins' advice to set big, hairy, audacious goals to heart. And they think by setting this stretch goal, I will increase the probability that good things come my way. And there's lots of, there's a way in which this sort of belief can run afoul of the sort of magical thinking that is in the book, The Secret, that you made fun of, that just by believing in some big, hairy, audacious goal, that will line up the forces of the universe to make it work. And there are ways in which visualizing, thinking ahead to a positive future can conserve the constructive backcasting role, where you begin from some desired end and reason backward to think what premises would have to be true, what conditions would have to hold for this positive future to realize itself. That can be a useful exercise. But just believing, repeating in some affirmation to yourself, I am beautiful, I am rich, I am skinny, I am immortal. That's not going to solve all your problems in life. And in fact, deluding yourself into thinking success is assured, if it reduces your willingness to do the hard work to invest in making that future come about, may actually reduce its likelihood. As I say in the book, the students in my class who are most sure they're going to get an A and therefore think they don't need to study for the final exam are not those who get the best grades.
Yeah. Once again, a lot to chew on that one, Don. It's so interesting. We have a lot of parents that listen to the podcast. So you make it clear you're a parent in the book. And is there anything, I think 2 boys, if I remember right,
That's
and
right. Yep.
and close to teenagers or middle school.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yep.
I just was wondering, is there anything that you and Sarah do to try to develop them as in this area that you're talking about? Like, do you ever go to them like, hey, you want to bet? Or like, is there anything you do that come to mind that parents could apply out of the book?
A number of things.
Yeah.
Yes, I bet with my kids. I have symbolically won several $1 million from my 15-year-old Andy, who is willing to stake out very high degrees of confidence on beliefs that are not always quite as accurate as he would hope. But some of the advice, the parenting advice that I offer is compatible with some of the cautious words that Carol Dweck offers for parents. Telling your kids they can do anything they want. If it leads them to mistaken impressions of the relationship between effort and outcomes, it doesn't necessarily serve them well. Affirming them with some sort of global praise, you're awesome, you're so smart, can actually undermine their willingness to do hard work, to invest in some new skill. It's frustrating for kids when they start working on some new talent, when they start practicing piano or playing the trumpet or playing soccer or reading books that challenge them. There will be frustrations. They will bump up against difficulties. And if you've told them you can do anything you want, you're smart, you're brilliant, you're wonderful, well, when they encounter frustration, they're more likely to give up or to decide, oh, I guess this didn't happen for me, I guess I can't do it. On the other hand, giving them realistic anticipation of some of the challenges that are likely to come their way and the effort that's required to persist through those challenges to attain the sort of mastery that is more fulfilling, that may be more helpful for setting our kids up for success.
Good. Yeah. This during the lockdown, we found a lot of joy looking out our windows at some bird feeders we put up. And we've got some birds that we haven't normally gotten. I don't know if it's because there's less activity outside or whatever, but we got some hummingbird recently put up. And I said to my son this morning, I said, instead of asking you, do you think you'll see a hummingbird today? I said, hey, what are the odds you're going to see a hummingbird today? And so he kind of gave me this look and he goes, I said, do you think it's higher or lower than 50%? He goes, I think about 30%. It was real cute.
Nice.
9-year-old.
Nice.
And so I go, well, how many have you seen this week? I think we've only seen one. No, we've seen 2. And I'm like, 2 out of 7 days. That's not so bad, I mean, that's actually not so bad. But I think it might just be kind of fun instead of saying, I love your line there about the bad weather, the witches in the weather. That instead of the will we see or not, will you make the team or not, will you get this grade or not, will we have school this fall or not, instead of doing that one, getting our kids to talk in probabilities, not because they'll be awesome at it, but maybe we'll get better at it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, many thoughts. It's tempting for us to fall into the trap of trying to predict the future. Every decision depends on a forecast of its consequences. And so prediction is part and parcel of effective decision-making. It can simplify our decision-making process if we pretend that we know what's going to happen. In forecasting things as diverse as product sales next quarter, or the number of employees that we'll need office space for next year, companies routinely pick a number. They go to the product manager who's most familiar with the product and say, what are sales going to be next quarter? Give us your best guess. And that person names one number, and then the company bases its production quantities on that. But it's not going to be that number. That number at best is drawn from a probability distribution of possible numbers. And the costs of overproduction versus underproduction relative to the truth are rarely symmetric. And so for companies, having a sense of what the distribution of possible sales looks like is enormously helpful. And so in the book, I tell the story of a company that came to my lab asking for guidance on how they could get better at thinking about the uncertainty in the sales of their products. Obviously, a lot of companies are struggling with the imperfections in their forecasts now. Man, with the economy dropping off a cliff and sales for lots of different product categories going to zero, they're having to change course very quickly. And thinking about the risks on either side, how bad is it if sales are double our forecast? How bad if sales are half our forecast or 5% of our forecast? That allows the company to place smarter bets in which it can hedge against an uncertain future. I encourage my kids to think about the uncertainties inherent in their future similarly, and try to help them think about placing smart bets on that uncertain future.
I like it. And I think another thing I took from your book, the hits keep coming here, is that you might think you come off as having more credibility by giving a number, taking a stand, but you found, or someone found, that you actually get more credibility when you put a probability to it, right?
Yeah.
Do I recall that correctly?
Yeah, spot on. That's research by Celia Gertig and Joe Simmons. And they explored the nuances of uncertainty. Lots of leaders, I think, worry that if they express lack of confidence, it will undermine their credibility as a leader. And the Gertig and Simmons result is comforting because it shows the way to how leaders can express well-calibrated, honest uncertainty. Saying I don't know is problematic. It suggests you haven't gone and done your homework. But you can say, I'm confident we have a 60% probability of success. To make the prediction, to pretend like you know what's going to happen about an outcome that everybody knows is uncertain, that undermines your credibility more than confessing the fact that, yep, we don't know how this coin flip's going to come out, or we don't know whether our team will necessarily win against the competition. Here's some things that we could do that'll increase our probabilities. Maybe we think we stand a better than even chance of winning, but success is not assured, and there are things that we can do that will affect the probability of our success.
I like that. I think it's freeing. It just because plus it's more truthful too. It's not just saying, oh man, I'm going to fake it with this number. I'm going to say, as best we can tell, we've got X probability. And I think that is something we can start with our kids, right? We can start to get them thinking that way. And you're a parent, but you're also a child, and your mom thinks you're Danny Downer with this book, if I remember right. And so, and she thinks you're an optimist. So let's wrap it up with this. Who are you, Don? How do you explain it? And give us a pitch for why this book is not just written by a Danny Downer. So I'll say.
Thank you for that. My research uncovers not only the circumstances in which we're all prone to being overconfident, but also the many circumstances in which we're prone to err on the downside. Underconfidence is a real thing, and the imposter syndrome leads competent people to think that they're not up for the task when they are. All of us are prone to thinking that we're worse than others when we're not, on difficult tasks where others' challenges are not obvious to us.
It's interesting. Yeah.
So when I ask the students in my class, for instance, how good are you at juggling or unicycle riding? They say, oh, I'm way worse than my classmates. I invite them to put themselves on a percentile scale from 0 to 100. And the mean for the class is way below 50. They think, oh, I suck at it. But maybe someone out there knows how to juggle, so I'm worse than them. When you encounter some challenging task, when you're new at some job that poses you with real challenges, you will be tempted to think, oh, maybe they made a mistake by hiring me. Maybe I'm not up for this. Others have experienced the same challenges. Educate yourself about the challenges that those who persisted and eventually succeeded also experienced. Seek out mentors in the organization who faced the challenges that you did, and take comfort in hearing how they persisted through those challenges. So fooling yourself, allowing yourself to give up too early because you're underconfident, to stay out of some competition that you would have been successful at, that is a mistake just as much as leaping into an opportunity where you will fail.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And are you an optimistic? You don't call yourself an optimist. You don't call yourself a pessimist. You know,
I strive toward perfectly calibrated confidence.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. That's good. Well, for those listening, if you want an insightful book, insightful read, really an interesting read. I read it in a day. It was just an easy read. To make better decisions, get a copy of Don's new book, Perfectly Confident. I put links to the book and to the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So Don, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. That's a wrap. All right. So, man, you're fun. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate your willingness to talk about that. I think probably the biggest thing I still struggle with is overconfidence. To me, is obvious after the fact. I just don't know how to know in the moment. Like, let me just give you a quick example. There's a friend I was talking to him last night. He goes, our company just said we're not putting everybody back in the office until there's a vaccine. And he's like, whoa, oh my. I mean, that could be anywhere from, well, maybe this fall, but probably like next year. He goes, that just seems, and then does that also mean everyone's going to get vaccinated? Will some people have some, anyway, it's an interesting thing. So are they being too skewed to one way, and someone else is like, bring it all in, we're going to have the big party now? And but at the time you don't know, but I'm telling you, 6 months from now we'll know, or not a year from now we'll know. So you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that's the hardest part with overconfidence. We ascribe it afterwards. We don't know.
A couple thoughts on that. So I am keenly aware of the risk of diagnosing specific instances post hoc. I get invitations all the time to criticize particular decisions as overconfident or underconfident. And I only do so with a caveat that you noted. We can look back and call someone overconfident, but we will be predisposed to indicting the unlucky. Right. Those who made a smart bet and the world went against them. They got unlucky on the coin flip. Yeah. So and then I will confess that at the moment of making a decision, you can't be sure. Right. You should be betting on expected value. So the company that says we're not bringing anyone back into the office until we're all vaccinated, that is a really risk-averse decision. Right. Is it a bad decision? Well, I don't know how they've thought through the expected values associated with that decision. So are all the people who work at the company heavy smokers over the age of 70? Right. Well, that would tip the scales. What is it's possible they're looking at numbers that say our productivity's gone up since we've had everyone working at home. This is great. Maybe they're planning on, giving up the office space completely and saving the money on the rent. So if they've gone through the logic of the expected value calculation and worked it all out, then it's possible they would have more credibility with their employees if they explain the logic behind that decision. On the other hand, if they haven't done that, and this is just like some knee-jerk reaction based on guesses, and they haven't specified the probabilities of the utilities involved, less reason to have confidence in that decision.
So interesting, man. All right, so if I ever get out to Berkeley, I'm buying you a cup of coffee if we can stay 6 feet away or whatever. But anyway, it's I appreciate it. You're very generous with your comments here, Don. So thank you very much. I don't think it's next. It's the following. It's a week after your release date that we're
awesome. Well, if you send me an email when it comes out, I will link to it and tweet about it.
Because you are a marketing master right now. That's what you are. So
I'm trying.
Thanks, man. All right. Have a good afternoon. See you. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Take care. See you. All right. So For those on the live stream, I don't know. I hope you found that interesting. I find Don, I find his insights helpful, and I still have trouble shaking the thing I just mentioned to him after we were officially done with the interview about, I think it's just, we don't know at the moment. But I don't know what I took from that is if you write it down. So it's what we know from project management is you write down the assumptions, right? If you write down your assumptions and then, build a plan based on those assumptions, then later on, what you can do is go back and look at those assumptions or go back and look at our risk registers and things like that. So it's, I think it's a fascinating thing. I think it's one of those things where we say sometimes that someone's a good decision maker and maybe they are, or maybe it just turned out well in the context that they were in. So a lot of interest. There were some examples of some questions that came up. I could see it out of the corner of my eye, but I wanted to give my attention to Don. So let's see if I can check these out real quick. Stanimir, Bulgaria, man. See the topic, perfectly confident. I'd like to ask the author, is there such a thing as perfectly confident or in this one perfect world or perfect situation? I think it's interesting how he titled it, perfectly confident, because I'm not so sure perfectly in the spirit of the three aspects of confidence. I'm not so sure perfect is a precise way of saying it. So I think it's just a clever way of saying it. But the subtitle is actually better, I think. It doesn't sell as many books, but the subtitle gets to the point, how to calibrate your decisions wisely. And that's really where he's trying to get to. How can we do a better job of calibrating our decisions wisely? And it says, we all know that doubts can question your confidence, but at the same time, you need to doubt in things to build your view for your life. So how can you combine it? And you know what? That's actually his book right there. How do we calibrate it? And a big part of it, I gotta tell you, a big part of it comes down to how you surround yourself, finding alternative hypotheses. And, he talks about the devil's advocate, of having people who will argue against what you're trying to say and not, think about how we do it culturally. Right? We just unfriend people. And, if we don't like what they're saying, he'd be like, no, don't do that. So anyway, that's just a couple of responses to that. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to people like Don. The episode will be coming out in a couple of weeks. If you've got any feedback, don't hesitate to contact me about it. I'd love it. In the meantime, have yourself a great start to the weekend. We'll see you. It's all right.